of bandwidth, but we did want to say hi. So we'll go ahead and stop that part and go into the webinar. Okay, so like we said, today's webinar is Mysteries of the Library Revealed Peer Review. And we wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping before we got started, especially for those of you who may be attending a library webinar for the first time. These things are going to be helpful to you. As webinar attendees, you can click on the orange arrow to expand what we call the GoToWebinar toolbox, and that'll give you some features that may be helpful. You can click on the arrow to access some of the behind-the-scenes features, such as the handout section. The handout section will contain the PowerPoint for tonight's presentation, the slide deck for the webinar. Below that is the questions feature, and it sort of acts like a chat box. So you can ask content-related questions in that box anytime during the webinar. Although we do ask that you use our Ask Librarian service. If you have other library-related questions that aren't necessarily about peer review or something that we go into in tonight's presentation, please do ask using that service, because we do want to make sure that someone helps to answer your questions. Otherwise, if you have any questions about what we're talking about, anything about peer review, make sure you go ahead and type that in the questions box as you think of them, and not like me when you're on your way home. Okay, so another thing is the closed captioning link. For those that want to view closed captioning, we have it available now. And the link that you see on your screen, we also put that into that questions chat box. And the final thing is that the recording link for this webinar will be emailed to all of you, to anyone that registered for the webinar, usually within a few hours after the webinar ends, but certainly within 1 to 2 days following the webinar. Okay, so while today's webinar is all about peer review, you may not realize that the Mysteries of the Library Revealed is actually an ongoing webinar series. On the third Monday of every month, it's always at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, library staff present a webinar on a specific topic. So while today's focus will be on peer review, you can check out next month's Mysteries webinar. And let's see, this one's going to be all about Boolean operators. And in March, you can get some organization and storage tips. So be sure to sign up for these. And of course, that'll be for organizing articles and other research and library-related resources. Taylor and I have a great closet organization webinar that we'd for some reason, we just can't get it approved. So those will be great. Be sure to look out for those. Okay, so what you see on the screen now are our objectives for this webinar, the three things that we really want you to leave this session with. And our goals are that at the session's end, you'll be able to, one, understand the peer review process, and it is a process. Second, we want you to be able to locate peer-reviewed articles, and that's going to be really important in the scholarship as a student and after, once you graduate. And of course, you want to verify that articles are peer-reviewed, and we want to make sure that you know exactly how to accomplish that. So what we want to start with is basically, what is peer review? What does that phrase even mean? You've probably heard about this in your assignments and tasks, discussions between your instructor and classmates at some point or another. Well, peer review is really the process of subjecting an author's scholarly work to the scrutiny of other scholars. So we're basically taking someone's scholarly work and having other scholars who are subject matter experts and are really knowledgeable in either that specific topic or maybe just the general field that manuscript fits into. So while the peer review is the actual process, What we call a peer-reviewed journal is a journal that uses that process. And keep in mind, we're going to talk about peer-reviewed journals, peer-reviewed articles. An article that is called a peer-reviewed article, it's really an article that was published in a peer-reviewed journal. Okay, so while each article is reviewed by the reviewers for that publication, for that journal, it's really the journal that has the designation of peer-reviewed. And so the standard articles that are published in that journal will be considered peer-reviewed. Next, peer-reviewed journals send submitted articles to reviewers, or they're sometimes called referees, who read and inspect the manuscripts that have been submitted to that journal. Okay, so let's take a closer look at how that process actually works. First, the authors of a scholarly article submit their article to a journal, to a publication. Next, that journal's reviewers, or the referees for that journal, review the article. So they're reading it, they're looking for questionable things or errors, or maybe just something that they need clarified. They're reading from the perspective of both trying to ensure that the scholarship is sound, but also trying to identify and predict maybe what those scholars that will be reading that article later, they might have questions about A, B, or C. So they're also looking for things that just could be expanded upon. It's not just necessarily looking for errors. So one thing to remember is that these reviewers aren't really employees of the journal. In fact, academic journal reviewers, they don't receive any money from that journal at all. They're just scholars of different backgrounds, and they happen to have subject expertise, and they agree to closely read and review that journal's manuscript submissions just to make sure that they're worthy of and suitable for publication. So next, the journal can theoretically accept or reject the article right then and there. But what happens in many cases is that the reviewers will have questions for or comments to the author. And so oftentimes the journal will send those questions and comments to the authors, who then usually make revisions to their work based on that feedback. So next, after the author makes any revisions, they'll now submit that revised version to the journal. And at this point, the article may be accepted or rejected for publication, or it may even get more of that process. It may get more comments that the journal asked them to address, more questions from reviewers. There are many variables, okay? This is, it's different between journals. It's different between what might be standard in one field versus another field, different disciplines. But what you see here is more or less the basic process for most academic journals. Now here are a few examples. I took these screenshots from a Google search. So, but they clearly show some examples of what you might see a reviewer write when they're submitting their comments or questions to a journal, or to the authors of a scholarly work through that journal. So the top box where it says Reviewer 1, the box in blue, shows you what a reviewer is saying about this particular journal. And you can see that they have some positive comments, some positive notes, some neutral notes, and also a couple of questions, things that they want more information on or need clarification for. And you can see that here. Now the middle part that's highlighted with the yellow box around it, this is coming from the authors. And so this is actually the response to that reviewers pointing out, it may be like different missing data tables and so on, that sort of thing. And that so they're when they respond to the journal, they not only include revisions, but they also usually have kind of a supplemental section that addresses those questions or comments directly, to just so they can ensure that they know that those specific that specific feedback was addressed. And of course, at the bottom, and I think this might be for a different journal, different example. That's just an example of what the authors might then submit to that journal when they're sending the revised material. So once they've done that middle part and they've kind of addressed that feedback, the bottom part is what they might then submit to them. Okay. So, why go through all this? What are the benefits of doing all of this? Because it is a pretty involved process, and that's one reason why it can take a while. Sometimes we'll have students that are looking for really, really current topics, or really, things that have happened in the last couple of months, and they want peer reviewed, and that can be difficult because of the length of the process. It's not necessarily the amount of time that you see with non-academic journals, and especially those that the peer review process can take a while. The reason to go through all this, well, there are several. First of all, the process of peer review really helps to ensure that what's being published is the soundest, highest quality research possible, at least for the knowledge, the extent of knowledge in that field or on that topic at that point. And so the process really also allows you to ensure that the articles that you're citing in your work, whether this is as a student or an instructor, as a scholar, practitioner, it's providing you with the most solid, authoritative support that's available for your topic and or discipline at that time. The most solid possible support that's available to you. And so, while peer review does not mean that the results or conclusions are definitive, it's not saying that this is absolute, because things can always come up as we learn more information about a topic or within a field. It can alter how some things maybe have been interpreted in the past, or affect that, or something can come up and you realize that was skewing past conclusions. So while it doesn't mean that a peer-reviewed peer-reviewed publications are going to have absolutely 100% correct results or conclusions, it supports a healthy growth of knowledge in a given area. So, we're human. We can't learn everything at one time, but a healthier foundation really allows us to continue to build on and kind of shape the accuracy and the extent of that knowledge. Okay, so one important thing that I really wanted to cover about peer review, Um, and the reason we're going over this is because we really want you to understand what peer review means. When you're asked to find, 3 peer-reviewed articles on condition X, or, population X, and there's usually more than one variable. It helps to kind of understand, why are they peer reviewed. It doesn't just mean that some people in the field think they're pretty good. It means that they've gone through that standardized process. So that's why we're going through this. And another thing that may help you to kind of understand that behind the scenes process that's so important to sound research and scholarship would be the 3 types of peer review. And there are 3 types: single blind, double blind, and open. So we just want to go over these just a bit. In single blind peer review, the reviewers know who the author is, but the author has no idea who the reviewers are. So the reviewers remain anonymous. So what's a possible benefit of this? Well, it can help to reduce some conflicts of interest. So just for example, there are some very narrow, very specific research topics out there. And, those really narrow research topics might be studied by a really small group of researchers. Some of those researchers may find themselves working together over and over because, of their research focus is so specific. And so many of them may have collaborated on a similar paper, or maybe they're rivals on a particular perspective of a result, or the meaning of result, or applying a conclusion to data and so forth. So, I mean, since reviewers are scholars of the topic that they're reading about, it can happen. So, in single blind, the reviewer is able to say, hey, that's my co author, or that's my brother in law. Maybe I should tell the journal so they can assign this to another reviewer. It just kind of reduces some conflicts of interest because the reviewers, although they're anonymous, they know who the author is or the authors are. Now, the next one is double-blind peer review. And double-blind peer review, on the other hand, the reviewers do not know who the author is, and the author doesn't know who the reviewers are. The benefits of having the identity of all parties be completely anonymous is that this can help to minimize some types of bias that might arise. So, for example, say your research focus currently has a lot of debate between scholars, or maybe there's some funding controversies happening, then double-blind reviewers not knowing the identity of the author or their institution could keep them from accidentally letting those biases affect their review of the work. And finally, the third type of peer review is open peer review. So unlike double blind, where no one knows anyone's identity, in open peer review, nothing is concealed. The reviewers know who the author is, the author knows who the reviewers are. And so while this type may not really prevent some types of bias, it does create a platform that sort of equalizes it somewhat. So with those journals that use this open type of peer review, sometimes both the reviewer commentaries and the author responses to those commentaries will be published right alongside the article. So it does try to equalize it, and you can imagine the advantages and disadvantages compared to the others that you might have in this one where everyone is known. So those are the three types of peer review for the process of peer review that different journals will opt to take. And with that, I'm going to pass this over to my colleague, Dr. Taylor Lee.
Okay, thank you so much, Tracy, for that overview. That was a wonderful explanation of peer review, how it happens, why it matters. And now we're going to transition and get into the nitty-gritty of how do we find peer-reviewed literature. Let me go ahead and move this control panel out of my way here. And so on this slide are a couple of icons or just images of things you might see in our databases and in our A to Z database list. So when you're in individual databases, you'll see boxes that say peer-reviewed or peer-reviewed scholarly journals. These will appear on the initial search page. Oh, yeah, let me. Oh, okay. Sorry, I think it was indicating that you couldn't see my screen. Hopefully you can now.
Yes, we can now. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, these two first boxes you will see on the initial search page in databases, and we'll see an example of that in a minute. And it's as simple as clicking that to ensure that you're seeing peer-reviewed results. If you don't check that, you might see some materials that are not peer-reviewed.
Now,
yeah, Tracy?
We're seeing your peer review planning doc.
Peer review planning doc. Aha.
I don't know if you have two screens.
I do. I think it is picking up the wrong one. Let me see here. Sorry about this. I duplicated my screen. Let me see if I can figure this out. Sorry.
If you want, I can show the PowerPoint from my screen, and then we can go to you whenever you're ready to go into Chrome.
That might be helpful. Yeah, let's
Okay.
do that instead of me trying to figure this out on the fly.
Okay. Let's go to, all right.
Perfect, thank you. All right, let me exit out of this. Okay, so and then so you'll want to check those boxes when you see them in our databases. You can wait to do that until you already run a search, and you can do it on that page of results. Or in most cases, I would recommend going ahead and checking that before you search. And then in our list of databases that you can access from the library's homepage by clicking on that databases A to Z button, when you scroll through and look at all the databases we have, you'll see some of these icons next to them. So some of them with the green hat, the green circle with the hat, and then others with the orange circle. So when you see those green circles, that means that all of the content in that database is peer reviewed. So in those cases, you don't need to worry about checking that box. There won't be a box because everything is peer reviewed. So those are great databases. Sage Journals is an example of that. Emerald Insight is a business database like that. Then moving on to the orange circle, that means some of the content, and that's the majority of the databases that we subscribe to. They have a lot of peer-reviewed content, but not everything is peer-reviewed. So you'll see that orange icon in those cases. And then if you don't see an icon, those are databases that either don't contain peer-reviewed materials at all, or we can't verify the extent of how much of what is in that particular database is peer-reviewed. So, okay, Tracy, I think I am going to transition now to Thoreau and run a search. Okay, let's see. I think it's going to try to do the same thing. Okay, tell me if this works. Are you seeing the library's homepage?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, okay. I think I got it figured out now. All right, so I want to show you what this looks like. This is the library's homepage. I've zoomed in as much as I can to make it as big on your screen as possible. You can search in Thoreau, which is a multi-database search tool, by just typing any search term into this main search bar. But I'm going to click right under this and go to the advanced search. And this is a good thing to know about. I recommend coming into the advanced search whenever you can, because it allows you to be much more precise in how you search. But I'm going to run a quick search for pets on the one hand, and then I'll do laws or policy or legislation. You can tell I've run this search before. Laws or policy or legislation or regulation or guidelines. Now, so we have our search terms in there. We want to come down, and here's that peer-reviewed box. We want to check that. You can uncheck the full text box if you want to. You can also limit to a date range over here if you want to, but we're just interested in peer review right now. I'm actually going to uncheck that so I can show you how many results we get first. So if we don't check that peer review box, we're seeing close to 28,000 results. And then we'll limit to peer review. And that brings us down to around 13,000. And then if we modify our date range, bring it up to show literature within the past 5 years, that's going to bring us all the way down to around 5,800. So you can see just by that quick demo how much you can limit searches, especially in really big, broadly searching databases like Thoreau. Now let me show you how to verify peer review. So again, if you have limited your searches to peer-reviewed materials in our databases, or you're searching in databases that have only peer-reviewed content, you won't need to worry about verifying the peer review. However, I know a lot of students like to search in Google Scholar. Google Scholar is great. It definitely has its advantages, but it also has its drawbacks. And one of those is that there is no ability to limit to peer review materials in Google Scholar. So I'm going to do a search here for pet regulations. and just sort of take a look at some of these results we're getting. Again, we can't limit to peer review. We're going to see lots of different kinds of content when we run a search in Google Scholar. We can't be sure of what is peer reviewed and what isn't. So there was one article I saw. Oh, it might have changed already. Let me use this as an example. So we have this article called Disturbance to Wintering Western Snowy Plovers. So this is about birds, and it looks like it's coming from a journal called Biological Conservation. So if you ever find something in Google Scholar, you're not sure if it's peer reviewed, look under the title. You'll see the of the article. You'll see the title of the journal. Go ahead and copy that, and we're going to go to a website called Ulrich's Periodicals Directory. You can get there a lot of different ways. It is in our database's A to Z list, so you can access it that way. You can also access it, I believe it's here. Get help. Sorry, I get these mixed up. Start your research. Here we go. Here's Ulrich's. Here's a link to it right here. I'm going to click on that, open it in a new tab. We have that journal title saved already. This will take you to our verified peer review guide, which is a really great resource. I'm trying to get to the website itself. Okay, so this is what Ulrich's looks like. So now that we're here, I'm just going to paste that journal title in there and search. And this is an example of what you might see when you run a search. So we look in the title column. We see 3 separate entries for biological conservation. So I'll explain why we're seeing 3 in a minute. But the important thing is that we look over here in this column with the referee jersey, and we see that every one of those iterations of biological conservation is peer reviewed. This is a referee jersey. This is the symbol that that Ulrich's uses to indicate peer review. Okay, so be careful because there's also a separate column that says reviewed. So that can be a bit confusing. You're looking for the referee's jersey. Now, why are there 3 different iterations? Because these represent the print form, the microform form, and the online form of this journal. And that's quite common to see 3 different versions. Okay, Tracy, I'm going back to the PowerPoint. And here we go on the more information slide. So I've just included on this slide a few more resources. If you have additional questions about peer review, you can get to that peer review guide we were just in. That covers everything we've talked about. We also have a few quick answers on peer review. How do you find peer review articles? That's a really concise answer to what we've talked about today. And then how do I verify that my article is peer reviewed? So that'll walk you through that same process. And then, of course, if you ever have any questions about anything we've gone over today, anything related to peer review or anything related to the library, you can contact us through the Ask a Librarian feature on our website.
Okay, we did have a question. Are peer-reviewed articles published only in journals? And we just wanted to share with everyone that's only journals, not books. Peer-reviewed articles are not found in books and in other types of sources.
That's right. Yeah, we reserve that term peer-reviewed specifically for journals. So either a journal will be peer-reviewed or it won't be.